good evening or good morning if you're watching this on YouTube later on. Welcome to this evening's workshop on how to build and maintain a wagering database. If you don't know me, my name's Kerrin. I work for Betfair in Australia. I head up our automation function. So we're here to grow automation on the exchange and everything that entails. And obviously a really key element of that is building a model for a lot of people, most people. And to do that, unless you've got a very odd model, you need a database to use as a key input to build the features, to then train your model to do X. Focus tonight is where you get that data, how you get that data, what you do with it once you've got it, and how you, if you're starting fresh particularly, how you create that database in a way that is scalable. Because quick and dirty is great, but quick and dirty won't necessarily let you add extra data sources, extra feeds, match things appropriately as you want to expand what you do. So anyway, we'll get to the guys in a minute. We've got two particularly well-known people from the community sharing their experiences today. So we've got Paul and Tom. Paul's going to be covering probably more of a beginner level view of how to approach a database. And then Tom will share some of his experiences from a more advanced lens. Now, both the guys work with data in their day jobs, as well as being very effective on the exchange. So they come with a lot of credentials, I guess, and a lot of things to back up what they do. But we will get to them in a minute. A little bit of, I guess, an intro from me first, though. So why are we here as a wagering company? Why are we sitting here trying to teach people and educate people and knowledge share? And the answer to that is that at Betfair in Australia particularly, we exist to create winners. And to do that, you need to learn what people who are good at what they do. And in what is a continually evolving market, you need to continue to sharpen your edge, whatever that is. And for a lot of people, that includes good data. So that's why we're here today. So within the automation function, there's me, there's Ben and Ivan. If you haven't met them yet, they're here in the background. If there's anything that we can do to help support you along the way, especially if you don't know us, please reach out. If you email automation@betfair.com.au, you'll get to me and the guys. And we are always keen to help where we can along the way. If you're not already part of the Quants Slack community, it's a shame. Join in, because the conversation there is always really engaging. Awesome group of people who are really open to sharing their knowledge, experiences, and insights with other people. There's an invitation here, but if you are watching this later and you need a link, just email automation@betfair.com.au and we can shoot you one. A little bit of a sneak peek to the future. We are actually about to launch a official Betfair Discord server. It's coming very, very soon. And I think that's really exciting because Slack's cool, but Discord's actually built for communities. And I think will really take the community to the next level. So watch out for that, coming soon. So tonight, like I said, we will start with Paul talking more beginner level, then Tom talking more advanced level. If you've got questions throughout, please drop them in the Q&A box or in the meetups thread on channel on Slack. I will save most of the questions for after the two guys have spoken, because I want to have the others' view on the if there are questions that are coming at either extreme, so that you guys get a good cross-section of opinions and experience. Try to make sure you hang around to the end, because we've got some exciting pieces after the guys have done their presos, and a bit of an announcement we want to share. But without any further ado, Paul, who is probably the most well-known member of the quants community, and apparently gets asked pretty often whether he works for us. I can say he doesn't. He's just an amazingly nice guy. And he's particularly well known for only ever depositing $100 into his Betfair account and never withdrawing it. Paul, thank you very much for coming tonight. I know that databases is something you're particularly keen on and interested in. Before that, though, would you, for the very few people who don't know you, would you mind sharing a little bit about you, what you do outside Betfair, how long you've been on the exchange, and what you did before the exchange?
Yep. So I guess I started betting on Betfair with $100 probably 20 years ago now. It's gone a long time. I started with $100. I've never added to the account. I've only done withdrawals, which is great. My tally, which I worked out a little while ago, a few months ago, is up over $800,000 that I've pulled out of just the exchange, not other bookies as well. But so yeah, I started with Betfair just to play with the REST API, just to see what I could do with it, automate it, and then started collecting data. And I was starting in a data analyst job at that time. So it was kind of a good play area. Just did what I learned at work and what I learned from reading around, and eventually it all came good. And so now I'm on the forum, well, on the Slack channel a lot, giving weekly updates. And on
your race to 100K. I'm very excited about that. Keen to watch that play out. It's interesting, just as an aside, how common a perspective that is, to do this as the hobby related to your core focus, because, you know, for a lot of people within analytical roles, be that data science, programming, you know, quants, all across the spectrum, you know, when it's stuff that moves so fast, right? And you want to keep up with it and you want to stay on top of it and keep learning, but it can be really hard to do that within a professional remit. Like, you don't necessarily want to play with things within a work environment. Whereas wagering, and particularly modeling and automating, gives you that creative something to apply it to outside of, well, let's paint by numbers, learn to code, which doesn't engage anyone. It's just interesting how common that is the reason that people in this space get into what they're doing.
I think a lot of the community are analytics focused.
Yeah.
Or data science, data analysts, or software coders.
Yeah, I use analytics as like the catch-all phrase. Yeah. Sort of anyone who deals. I hate tech because it feels a little bit offensive to some of our spectrum, but also it doesn't capture like the data science quant space particularly well. So yeah, I go with analytics for what that's worth. Yeah. Anyway, and how long on the exchange? Remind me.
I think it's about 20 years from memory.
Coming up. We've pretty freaking close. That's wow. Well, I think that's really cool. Really cool. Anyway, you have a preso you're going to share, I think.
Yep.
To work through. Do you want to do that?
Yep. Just give me one sec. Okay. Just making sure I share the right screen. Yep. Hopefully that's awesome. Displaying.
Got it.
Okay, so I'm going to look at it from a high level. If you were to start out from scratch, how I would do it and how I have actually done mine. This is how my database looks. But the first thing that I did want to cover is Excel versus databases, because I know a lot of people use Excel. It's easy. Lots of people use it in their day job.
It's valid. It's completely valid, right?
Yep.
It's an approach, but you know, it's valid.
once you get up to those million rows, so it starts to get very slow, and there's a lot of things you can't do in it. So, and at that point, you really need to move to a database.
But I think the good thing about using this is that starting in the more analytical space, I think the difference between the two can intimidate people. And fundamentally, Excel is a database. It's just an easily visualizable database. So, through the rest of this, just treat, let's say that you've downloaded a month's worth of your betting history from Betfair into Excel. You now have a betting database. May not be a particularly sophisticated one, but it is a database, right?
Exactly. You can filter it, and you can do charts off it, and you can write some analysis on it, some basic analysis. You can do some linear regression and things like that. So a lot of people start with Excel. If you're in the sports space, there's not that much data compared to if you were in racing. So the sports space, you can kind of get away with Excel for quite a while until you need to move on. But if you're in racing, you pretty much fill up 1 million rows within a week. It's not that hard, but it's pretty easy. So if you have a look at this, you've got sheets in Excel. They're essentially, a sheet is like a table. You've got columns of data. Again, in databases, it's called columns. You've got rows of data. It's called rows in a database. It's really easy to take the terminology from one to the other. In Excel, you're going to do formulas, like add one cell to another cell, do sums. It gets a little bit harder when you get into databases. You've got to learn a language to work with that. Now, there are some coding languages like Python and that will abstract out that language, but behind that, there's essentially the structured query language, SQL, that is used. So just to give an idea, if you were adding two things, it's really just select A plus B from a table. And that will just add those two things together. It will do it
anyone, like in terms of SQL, like people who have no coding experience might look there and go, crap, I need to learn to code, and that's scary. But literally, like, the code is select X column, let's think your column in your Excel thing, from Y sheet where X equals Y.
Exactly.
Like that is literally, or you don't even need the where. It can just go select X from Y, and it really is that easy. Like, of all the coding languages, it is. I've written much more complicated Excel formulas than SQL, and SQL is easier to follow too. So
it's quite easy. You can pick it up really easy. You do a short course on it, and you'll be able to do 90% of the functionality within a day. The advantage of Excel, it's flexible, it's easy to use, but Excel sheets can become messy. They're not really structured in a way that works long term. They don't scale well. Once you hit that 1 million rows, you might need to create a new sheet, you might need to create a new Excel spreadsheet. They do become very messy. Whereas a database is going to scale very well. It's an industry standard for data analysis. It has been for, 50 years plus. They've done a lot. When I say the developers of databases have done a lot of coding that completely outstrips what can be done in any of the coding languages. It does it so efficiently. You can analyze billions of rows really quickly. And you need that when you're looking at 1,000 different variables across a race.
It's also easier to share and collaborate on too, right? Like, an Excel sheet is great when it's just you, and again, great within the definition of, but as soon as you want to collaborate with someone else, that gets very messy. Whereas it's easy enough to host a database somewhere where 2 or more people can access it and add to it, and that is definitely automation gets much easier. And I think we've all seen people automate within Excel sheets, and you can do it. I don't just mean automate betting, but automate scraping and things like that. But it gets a bit messy, right? As you said, messy.
It does. But again, disadvantage, you need new skills. You need to be able to install it. You need to be able to actually use SQL as a language. That's the comparison. So what I'm going to do is kind of go through the different types of databases that I have. So if I was starting from scratch, but this is how I have mine set up, I have an operational or transactional database. That's essentially
yours.
Yes. So sitting on my laptop. So you don't need big hardware to run this stuff.
No,
the transactional operational database is everything I get from a source. So it could be something that I scrape from the web, whether that be from Betfair's hub pages, or it could be something where I get from the APIs, such as you got your fast track API, you've got your best Betfair polling or streaming API. That's all going to go straight into my operational database. There's also, I've got a history database. Now, the reason I've got this is because I want to keep my operational database as small as possible. I only want to, it's there to deal with what's happening now, what's coming up. It's not there for analysis or anything like that. Yeah. So I want to keep that small so I can read it quickly, keep that speed, keep it in memory if I need to. And I just want to siphon everything else off into another database.
And that operational one is generally dealing with the creation of upcoming outputs, right? That you've built a model and then you need data to feed into that model to produce the outputs for today's racing, next week's racing, whatever. Yes. That's for the now and future, yeah?
Yes.
Basically, whatever you need for that.
What I need for the next, say, 24 hours and what's coming in live, as in prices and stuff like that.
Yep.
And all my betting activity is based off what's in that operational database. History is there so that I can replay stuff. It's basically just a copy of operational over time. Where I get a lot of benefit is I go to an analytical database. Now, all these sit really within the same database. It's just a different schema in the one database. I have an analytical database, which is structured differently, and I'll go into that in a couple of slides, but it is made to do historical analysis, not for machine learning. It's made for looking at the data and looking for those trends or insights across all of the data really quickly.
So more things where you go, I hypothesize X, let's check it.
That's right.
Not let's pass it into a machine learning algorithm and it will figure it out and the black box can do its thing.
Yep, that's right.
It's more.
Say we wanted to know what the strike rate was of, based on the last placing of the horse in the last 3 races. I could quickly do that in my analytical database and have the answer back in 2 seconds.
Yep. Jamie Carr on X horse.
Yeah, yep. Pretty easy. The machine learning database is where I store all my features that go into the machine learning models. So that is structured very differently, again, from the analytical database, because it needs to be denormalized, nice big flat structure that can feed nicely into the models. So I can do my training, I can set up this and get it straight into the operational database, because I run a lot of models. I run way too many models.
So that's saying that the analytical one isn't necessarily structured as features, it's just the raw data. Is that right?
It's structured in a Kimball star schema methodology. Okay. So I don't want to get too technical, but I'll go into how that one's structured in a couple of slides. My machine learning database feeds back into my operational database for upcoming races. So that's how I've got mine structured. Just to go and look at the relative size of my databases, if I was to look at them. As you can see, operational is really small, histories builds up over time. All of my data sits in analytical. That is where I create transformations and I get stuff out of the data that most people don't have. So I'll join, if I'm living in the machine learning world, features, I will create a lot of features and store them in my analytical database, but I will have thousands upon thousands for every different sport and different type of race that I'm looking at. And that's probably where most people need to spend most of their time. That's where you get your value. That's where you find things that people aren't looking at. So I don't know, what could you look at in there? Like if I looked at weight, for example, I might have 1,000 different variables just for weight. So
weight on X track, for example, weight on X, you know, on new starters, on geldings, on yada yada.
Yep. How did this horse go at all these different weights? How does it go when it's up in weight? How does it go when it's down in weight? A lot of different things. So I'll have many, many different features, and that's where I spend most of my time. So it's not in training the machine learning models or anything like that. It's basically creating
feature generation
that no one else has or hasn't thought about. And that's where you find your edges. Machine learning, that gets a bit big because you are denormalizing a lot of the data, and it needs to be very wide tables. So just looking into this is how I structure the different tables. So in the operational and history, it's going to be whatever comes from the API or your source. You're just pretty much going to store it. There'll be relationships between those horse names, race names, dates. History is going to look exactly the same, but when you get to analytical, you want to look at something that's called a star schema. So you've got this thing in the middle that's called a fact table. It's nothing too exciting. All it is numbers that you might want to look at. So it's going to be your profit if the horse won. It's going to be -1 if the horse lost. It's going to be a 1 for a win, 0 for a loss. They're probably the main two, but you might have different staking ideas in there. So you'll have different profits for different staking methods on whether you back or lay, whether it's proportional or level stakes. Your dimensions are all the data that's going to come in from different sources. Now, all they are is just a different source. So you can think of this is race data. This one is horse data. This might be the models from the hub, from Betfair, their ratings. This might be the TAB ratings. And you're basically going to have a whole bunch of dimensions that just add on to the fact. So if we needed to add one, we just add another dimension pointing into the fact. So you create a new relationship.
So are your dimensions based on similarity of data? Is that the grouping, or is it on source?
I split it sometimes. So sometimes it'll just be based on the source because there's not that much data. If the source is really big because you've pulled down,
then you'll split it.
Yeah, then I'll split it. So you get.
But you won't mix it?
I won't, sorry.
But you won't mix it from two sources?
No, I'll keep them separate because sometimes sources stop working.
No, I like that. And on your operational and history ones, is that the same as well? Is that you'll have an X website, you may or may not, a scraped table and a tab table and a Betfair table and I thought that was and then you're going to link them all with each other.
Yes.
We could have a whole session just on matching.
Yeah, so I'm just going to link it all in this fact table here. So it's one spot. So if something stops working, it's just not going to be there for the races where it's not working. Machine learning are going to be very wide tables. Anyone who's done machine learning knows that it likes to have data in certain formats, and if there's zeros and ones, it works a lot better. So I do a lot of bucketing and not trusting the encodings and stuff like that. So I'll generally create a lot of my encodings in here automatically and store them in my machine learning tables. So just to show how I would add something, if I had a new source coming in, I'd have a new table come in the operational that would be replicated to history, and I'd just add a new dim in. But that data that I analyze in here, I might only add a little bit of it to the machine learning tables. These will be structured in a way that makes sense. It may be, this is just looking at good races. This is just looking at slow races. This might be a soccer table, whatever. But you're only adding on a little bit of data generally to these. And that's why this is getting a lot larger, because this might have 100 variables that you've brought in or 100 new columns,
Yep.
you may only want to add 4 or 5 to the machine learning over time. So this is very, very high level of how I get things done. But I know that a lot of people look at what I do and go, wow, how does he run so many models and do it all on a laptop? So I thought I'd touch on performance. So you've got to use the right structure for what you need. So 3NF is just the normal form, and this is where it's getting a little bit technical, but it is just tables stored in what's called the third normal form, which does some joins between the tables, and I don't want to get too technical, so I'll stay away from it. But it's a form of tables that will work for the operational database. The star schema is going to be used for the analytical part of the database, and then denormalized is for the machine learning stuff. If you stick to the right structure, it's going to
The right thing.
a lot. Indexing is important. If you understand what most common queries are, you can set indexes on the database. That's just a quick lookup so that it knows how to join the tables quickly.
Give an example.
So for instance, if you need to look up a horse's name, for example, if you want to find all the stats for a horse, so you could index by the horse's name, and you could quickly pull up all of their historical races within a couple of seconds.
So you could consider that as tagging those rows with that information, and the tags are easier to access than just generic lookups. Is that a fair analogy?
Yep. You want to move everything into memory where possible, but when I say everything, I mean for the next few races that are coming up. You can't put your entire database in memory. It's not going to work. You don't have enough memory. But if you focus on the next few databases and preload those into memory, it's going to be there ready to go. And when the race hits, everything's going to be available for it. So I run all of my operational stuff in memory, but all my analytical stuff will stay on disk. If you learn to write good structured query language, that's going to help. Using the correct joins, and I didn't go into joins in this, but you can join tables different ways. That will minimize the data and will effectively speed up the join. A lot of this happens.
I'm very bad at.
Yeah. So a lot of the database stuff will compensate for you having bad SQL, but still. If you limit data movement as well, if you're moving data around a lot, that's going to cause a problem. So that's why my operational goes to history, and then I'll have maybe once a day move history to my analytical, and then I'll move to the model, the modeling side when I need it, when I'm ready to use it in models. And using the correct data types. So everything takes up space on disk, everything takes up space in memory. You can have it use 1 bit, which is the smallest bit of memory, or if you put it as an integer or a character or something like that, it's going to take up a byte.
So the example, a pretty easy example there, I think, being like track rating. You could say that as a string, so as a text, right, which keeps a heck of a lot more memory on disk than if it is saved as a number, as an int or whatever. It's interesting. Yeah, I think this is one for people to get their head around. People, I think, before you start working in more of an analytical world, you assume that the numeral 5 will be treated the same way. As long as it's a numeral 5, it's the numeral 5. But it's not. If that numeral 5, the one that gets me all the time when I work in Excel is market IDs. So because market ID goes 1 dot XYZ, if you save it as a number, which is what you normally should do, right? If you save any numbers, should be some form of, int, long, float, whatever. But because market IDs can end in a 0, you then, and this happens in Excel because Excel's trying to be smart, and trailing zeros you don't do those in numbers. They're not they're not relevant, but they are in market IDs. And then when you try and match on market ID, it breaks stuff. So that's an example of where I'm forcing things to be a string just to keep it as a string, and not as relevant when you get to proper databases, because they're smarter and not trying to help the same way that Excel does. But just, I think, a really good example of, it's exactly this. You may be looking at the same numerals, but the computer is treating them very different ways. And I think that's one to get your head around, but also to consider, like, where can you use a Boolean? Where could a true or false substitute for another value that would take up a hell of a lot more disk?
Exactly. So and just putting the right data in the right database. You don't want to keep your operational database bloated if possible. I think that's pretty much what I had. Yep. That's how I do it. And that was a very high level explanation of it. There's a lot more that goes into it, and I do it as a job, so it's a lot easier for me. But if people start thinking about putting their data in the right spot, it'll go a long way to help.
Top tips, because it's something that comes up all the time, and Betfair are particularly bad at it, so we definitely don't make your life easy. But top tips on matching between different data sources. So, for example, let's say that you happen to be looking at Betfair and Tab and RaceNet and Punters, for example. Any top tips for trying to match in a way that's going to hit more often than not?
Yeah, so I just use a lookup table for most things, and that's across everything. So I'll have one lookup table that might have the racetrack, for example, and it has all the variations that it's seen across all those different sites, and it just basically looks up and converts to what I class as the real name that I use across all mine. So there's a lot of conversion that you're going to have to do, and the main ones are racetracks, horse names, jockey names, trainer names. Different sites put things differently.
Interesting. Having spent way too long working in different versions of matching, something that I found really useful is to use string matching algorithms. So, like, Jarrow Winkler is a really good example. It would be great if everyone spelt everything the right way, but we don't. It's unfortunately, it's the flip side. Particularly in Betfair, where we have, there is a manual element to the process, which is an awesome thing, because that's why we've got the fastest settlement times, but does lead to human error. And if you have typos, if you're trying to do 100% match A to B, there's no space for typos, but also isn't particularly forgiving of things like numbers and, appendixes like the NZ on the end and things like that. Whereas something like a Jarrow Winkler string matching algorithm goes, I want it to be the highest match, if you're looking at two lists, but also have a similarity greater than X%. And it's really useful. Like, it's not particularly hard to implement. Like, it sounds super complex, but it's not. Just something that if I were starting from scratch with, looking at it.
It's definitely a lot more work when you're starting from scratch. When you've been doing it for years, you've built up the table, and it's pretty easy. It rarely needs editing.
Yeah. As long as no one makes stupid.
Yeah, but you usually get those over time as well. So.
Yes, you are 100% right. Thank you very, very much. I will bring you back in a minute. We're going to swap you out for Tom, so that Tom can talk about not necessarily the other end of the spectrum, because that certainly wasn't just 101. But Tom, also one of our particularly well-known and appreciated community members. Tom, if we can, there we are. How are you doing?
Good. Yes.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Long time no chat, way too long. For those who don't know you, can you give a bit of a background on you and what you do in your day job and how you found the exchange?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not as experienced or in this whole game as Paul is, or some of the other guys around the traps. But it's been a few years now, probably 4 or 5. I'm actually not 100% sure how long I've been on.
So I know that you and I have been talking for quite a while, and then I flew up and we had lunch when I was pregnant with my son. My son turns 3 next week. So for me, that means we're at least 4 years in.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Time goes fast, right?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, so that's interesting. But in terms of my day job, I'm working for a startup we're called MakerOps Incorporated, and we're building an automation platform that's looking to help businesses to really, I guess, build their own automations and make programmable workflows that they can drag in elements and connect them together and then run them as workflows. So that's what I do in my day job. I'm the chief data scientist here, so it's a lot of work on the data side of things, I would say, but also product development as well. So I'm involved in lots of aspects of the business.
It's a startup.
Yeah, so it's a startup. You kind of do everything, which is so great. But yeah, so my playing on the exchange is really experimenting with tools, and that my take on this talk and this presentation is really just to give everybody an idea of the flavor of the tools and the things that I use around the data stack. Yeah.
Cool. Do you want a screen share?
That's me. Yeah, I'll bring it up.
And you also, like Paul, you've got quite a racing focus, yeah?
Yes, I'm entirely racing focused. Is that showing up?
It is.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm entirely racing focused, Australian horse racing primarily at the moment. I did previously dabble in the greyhounds. So I have all that set up, but it's currently switched off pending some stuff that I'm working on and improving on the horses. So yeah, I need to get back to that, but yeah, it's on pause at the moment. But yeah, so basically this is my presentation. It's an overview of my racing data stack. As I said, it's a bit broader than the remit, which was on databases particularly. But for me, I think, yeah, that it's more than just the database. There's a lot of surrounding infrastructure and thinking that goes into how like an automation platform is put together. So I've sort of taken a bit of liberty and expanded beyond that. So to start off with, I guess I'll jump into the first slide, and which is really just a pipeline diagram.
Now you are sharing these slides later, right? So people don't need to be taking notes.
Oh yeah, right. I'll tuck the link into Slack and also into the chat here so that you guys can jump into this later. But yeah, broadly, this is the kind of key parts of the ecosystem, I would say. On the left-hand side, you have your sources and your ingestion, storage, all the kind of things that you might want to be grabbing. So that might be, stuff from the Betfair API, the BSP histories, anything you want from Tab or Punters or Racing Zone or all these other, whatever sites that you're gathering data from or APIs. That the other part that comes into these sources, I guess, is like stuff that's happened inside the platform. So you also want to be kind of ingesting what your automation bots are doing
and tracking.
Yeah, your messaging, even your machine learning experiments. So over on the right hand side, I've got the kind of data science ML area and layer. Those things also need to kind of connect back in as sources, just so you can keep track of everything. So ingestion on the left. In the middle, we have the data warehouse. So that's the main focus of, I guess, what I'll get into and talk about. And then on the right and kind of bottom is really this how the data is served out of the data warehouse. It's it's kind of in the industry, I guess, the data warehouse is becoming increasingly important and is becoming the center of lots of applications. So it's sort of been interesting to watch this journey happen. SQL kind of plodded along for many years without too many changes. And then, you know, more recently, it's become, as databases have moved into cloud and SaaS offerings, it's just become bigger and bigger and even more important. You know, companies like Snowflake have really kind of expanded and made them that much more important. So,
and made it so much more accessible too. Like, it's, you know, gone are the days of you having to have your own stack that, you know, you maintain, and so, you know, that's a high barrier of entry. Whereas there are so many ways to spool up XYZ platform, you know, Snowflake, or even just a VM that has more storage than your local machine. I think the barrier of entry is lower than ever, and there's so many resources too to learn how to use them. Even, you know, again, back in the day, that wasn't the option, right?
Yeah, totally. So my stack is pretty much entirely cloud-based. I run all my data collection things using AWS Lambda. So they're like micro computes. The storage is in Amazon's AWS S3. So like an object storage. My database itself is Athena. I use that because it's cheap. It's not particularly awesome and doesn't have, you know, as many features or as high powered as some other cloud ones out there. But it does the job, and it's pretty powerful in terms of the amount of data that it can handle. So I'm mostly happy with that. It's not good for applications like Paul mentioned, like an operational database. So it's not going to be able to handle lots of quick requests. There's quite a high latency on the queries. But if you're running something that's very analytics intensive, then it's great. It can crunch massive chunks of data, and you don't need to worry about indexes necessarily. Yeah, okay, so diving into detail on ingestion and storage. Yeah, so what kind of data sources do you have? Pretty much like web scraping, right? This is what we all do. This is where it all comes from. And much of the stuff is, yeah, coming from scripts and things like that. It's pretty like hacky, dirty stuff. But yeah, in my tips around the ingestion and in the storage would be, you know, they're there, but definitely write reusable collection scripts so that if you've scraped an entire history once, you can you've got a little wrapper that will let you run that again and pull all the files down in case you missed a field the first time. But definitely try and grab as much as you can and keep it as raw as possible when you first do it. And that way you can save those files into an object storage and get back to them later, essentially.
I see way too many people who are like, oh, I only needed XYZ fields from that, and therefore I don't have. It just, yeah, amazes me, because I'm like you, just get it all, because if you don't need it, you don't need it. But if you do need it.
Yeah. And if you're accessing something from, say, a year ago that's available on the site, the chances are it's not going to get updated. So once you've pulled it, you can store it. And you also, know, there is like
there's no guarantee it'll be there in the future either. So
yeah,
you know, people are getting more and more gated about this. So the more that you can maintain, the better.
Yeah. So essentially, the tooling I'm using here is, as I mentioned, Lambdas, cron for scheduling. So this is a really awesome command line tool that, or in fact, through AWS, you can set up schedules. So at 8 a.m. every day, I will kick off my data collection routines. And then at 6 p.m. at night, I will kick off my let's get the results from the day routines, and let's do daily reporting. So they all commence off these timing calendar-based triggers using cron. Yeah, so that's pretty much it there. Last final tip, don't forget to store your live predictions. You really want to know what your model did. And if you didn't keep that, then it's going to bite you later, because you'll be like, oh, I don't have that anymore. And I've changed the model since then So yeah,
that's another gotcha, right? It's kind of it's part of that ritual baptism by basically everyone will do it. Can I just ask, compared to, and this is probably the right screen to look at it on, compared to Paul, who had 4 different databases effectively, do you keep all yours in one? Or am I missing
no,
the diagram?
it's this middle part. So he had operational, historical, analytical, and machine learning, and kept them as 4 different databases. I have a lot of databases, but broadly they're arranged into raw, cleaned, and modeled. So I go with this sort of a 3-stage approach. For me, raw is like, that's how it came from the source. So my scraper literally dumped a HTML file or whatever it got. Maybe it was a JSON file from hitting an API, or maybe it was some weather data from an FTP, and it's very, very raw. It hasn't had anything done to it except that it's been loaded into the data warehouse. From there, I will do cleaning and standardization, and that's where everything is kind of getting ready to be used. But broadly, it's the same. It'll be kind of like a 1-to-1 table. There'll be like the BSP history raw, and there'll be BSP history cleaned. Yeah. From there is when it starts to change, and you do transformations. So, the star schema approach, fact and dimension tables, all that kind of things. I put all that into an area called modeled. And that's where you start to see this normalized third normal form type tables, like races, runners, horses, jockeys, this kind of detailed stuff happening.
And you're collating it a bit more, aren't you, at that point, that where Paul was talking about, like within his analytical one, having a Betfair table, for example, and that all the Betfair data would be in one. It looks like from this that you're going, this is this runner, and then you'll collate all the information from the different sources to runner. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I'll have all that joining happening in the modeled stage. Yeah. Cool. But okay, so the first step in that is the cleaning, right? So like you guys were talking about, string matching is a real pain. Basically, I use regex, which is short for regular expression, and it's a kind of confusing and complicated pattern matching.
Very useful.
I guess you call it script or algorithm, but it's been implemented. It's been around for years. It's been implemented in lots of platforms. SQL even has it, so you can write a regular expression function that will apply a regular expression to your column. There's lots of different flavors of SQL. Some of them may or may not have regex, but the one I use does have it. So it's really awesome. I can kind of do the cleaning within SQL, which is super cool. Super cool. My tips around using regex would be clean the track names, the horse name or dog name, clean the jockey names, clean the trainer names, all that stuff. Things you want to look out for are brackets. Regex can do a really cool thing where it will match the opening bracket, then match anything for any length, and it'll match the closing bracket, and will delete all that. So you can write a fairly simple expression. I think I have an example. Yeah, there. That's regex in there in the orange. So there's lots of slashes, brackets, dots, and all that kind of stuff, and pipes.
It's another thing
that's what regex looks like.
It doesn't make any sense until you look at, I don't know, like I guess a dictionary to understand how regex works. And then it's a bit like Braille. Like it's not actually that complicated once you just sort of have the translation layer, I guess.
Yeah, it can be hard to interpret an already written regex, but if you write it and build it up slowly by yourself, you'll be able to get how it works. They often say you can write it once and then use it, and when you have to come back to it, you just throw away and start again, which is often the case. Just some other stuff around cleaning. You want to do things like filtering. that could be removing bad data. Extraction, that could be picking out keywords from comments. You might want to do calculations, which might be like a weighted averages, things like that. Simple calculations, I would say. Conversion, cleaning. The things you're looking for are errors, duplicates, missing data, outliers, you know, these types of things that can come back to bite you. Quick note on data modeling. So I like to use this tool called DBT, which is short for Data Build Tool. And it can do a bunch of really cool things. Basically, the concept is it wants to bring in software engineering principles into the data modeling world. So you get things like code control, you get functions. I've got an example here. So you write these things called macros. So here's a macro called clean dog name. It takes in this parameter here, raw dog name, and a Boolean variable here, remove dog number, and it will generate either the top line of SQL if in the first if clause, or if that Boolean was the other one, it'll give you the second line, which does a slightly different transformation function. So the advantage of this is that in the outer query, you just need to call the macro, and then you can trust, if you're using this cleaning function, you can use it in multiple places without having to maintain the same SQL across to make sure you're doing this, applying the same cleaning steps to each table that you do it on. So yeah, my experience with it has been it's really awesome. But that being said, I would say that you probably don't need it if you're not making lots and lots of tables and joining lots and lots of things. If you've just kind of got, yeah, you can kind of keep track of it. But once you get to a fairly large number of tables that are joining into tables that are joining into tables, it becomes useful to use something like DBT to help you organize your code. Another advantage it's got is you can do packages, and so these can actually be published as well. So here's an example here. The input might be orders. Here's what the input looks like. Then you write this select query here, which is calling this function from the dbt_utils package, and it's calling a function called pivot. You're pivoting on the column color, and it doesn't know what colors it needs. So there's another function in here which it calls called dbt_utils.get column values from the input table, and it will work out what all the columns need to be, and it will create this output pivoted table for you. So you can kind of replicate stuff that you would do in Excel using functions. You can do this without DBT in standard SQL, but it's a bit harder because it actually would have to call this first inner query to get the column values first and then construct the SQL. So using DBT allows you to, I guess, have this rebuilding of the models as you go.
And when we talked earlier about accessibility, like I think that's the other thing that's really helped to lower the barrier of entry into, to use my phrase from earlier, all things analytical, because there are excellent packages, excellent libraries, excellent tools that, you know, on the surface might be intimidating, but once you learn to use something like DBT, I imagine it makes functions like that a lot more accessible to new users than if they had to write it themselves and learn everything that was required to write that logic, even if they knew what they were trying to do from the beginning. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit to get up and running and learn how to use it, but it will help you once you kind of get better at it. On the package side, like I think it's a really cool feature and something that should be more utilized in SQL land. That being said, you need to have use cases where, like I do this operation a lot. I want to simplify my code down. Let's wrap it up inside a macro and put that macro into a package so that I can use it anywhere. So you got to find those use cases. Okay, so on joining separate sources together, a lot of people ask questions about this. It's a massive pitfall. here are some things that have happened to me that I've found after doing a join. You end up having things like the same horse running twice in the same race. And you go like, how the hell did that happen? You know, I've seen the same horse running in 2 different races on the same day, which obviously probably wouldn't have happened either. The same horse running at 2 different tracks on the same day, you know, 1 jockey, 2 horses, you know, you get the picture. There's just a lot of like crap that can end up in your data if after doing joins. So definitely
there's one you haven't put there. You said 2 horses, same name, but you haven't gone 1 horse, multiple names, which is another very real problem that horses and dogs do change names. And yes, you could start over from scratch, but you are, I think, missing what is a fairly, not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but obvious pitfall. If you do, each time they change name, you just treat it as a different, which I know a lot of people do, but I don't think it's a particularly good approach.
Yeah. So really the call out here is just after you do a join, check. Make sure you look at, have I really done this properly? Where you know, one cause of this is that you actually have duplicate entries in one of your raw tables, where maybe you scraped the same source twice, and one time it returned data in a certain field, another time it didn't. So you end up with 2 rows that look identical in every column except for one. So if you tried to do like a deduplication on that particular table, it wouldn't remove them because they're different. But they actually do need to be combined. So yeah, enforcing uniqueness on the right column is something super important that you definitely need to do. So pitfalls there. How are we going for time, KG? Am I good to keep going?
Keep doing your thing. It's really interesting.
Okay, so this one's a little example of how you can build up a form table from a raw results table. So essentially the assumption and the input into this would be a table that has fields like date, horse, which might be the name, the track, the race number, the barrier, the track condition. Then you've got that's all details around the race. Then you've got result fields like finish position, the result, which is a 1-0, did it win or not, the time that it ran, and its speed, say, as an example. So this is kind of the columns that we're working with. It's just a single results table. I call it enriched in my database, and this curly bracket syntax is a DBT thing. So this means that this is a reference to that table. And when DBT runs itself, that will compile into the final SQL. At any rate, essentially what I'm doing here is joining a table to itself, and I'm doing a left join, and I want it to join to itself where the horse name is the same. So essentially what this will do is for every single race that a horse has, I want to duplicate that record and create all the historical races as well. So that's where I'm filtering twice on, so doing a conditional, an open conditional join on the date field, so that the F is sort of the current race and the R is all the historical races, since the date from the R table will always be less than the date from the current table, the F table. And so I'm using these aliases to refer to those columns. So this is creating like a really massive, this is going to explode the number of rows in this intermediate table. And it's going to be huge, but it'll essentially give you, for every race, all the races that happened before that one for a horse. So then what you need to do is take that exploded view and apply this second query, which groups everything down from this history table. So the result of this one, I would call the history table, which I'm got a reference down here, and then group it to the current race. So I'm grouping by the current race's date, the horse, the track, all the other race level details, and all the result columns like finish position, result, time, and speed, I'm applying an average function. So this is going to create the average finish position, the win rate, the average run time, and the average speed for that horse prior to the current race. And it will do that for every race. So this is kind of a way to use the power of SQL to create a big table of form. Now, obviously, there's big problems with this, which is that, you know, speed is going to be averaged across all the horses' races. So even if it ran like a 2,000 meter race and it ran a 1,500 meter race, you know, you probably shouldn't be averaging those speeds. But nonetheless, this is the pattern that you can apply to generate a form table purely using SQL without having to go out into Python or something like that.
I would love to know from the floor. So, you know, host and psych, interested. This is something that I think would be very interesting to dig into a bit more. The whole approach to, like, feature generation at the best of times is interesting, but feature generation within SQL, I think, is particularly interesting, especially as we're talking about like barriers of entry, not having to, as you said, go too far into Python land to do that. Keen on your thoughts, guys, as to whether this is something you'd like to learn more of, because if so, we might twist Tom's arm on it, but let us know your thoughts. Thank you. I've been wondering, you and I have talked about it before and I was keen to see it.
Yeah, so this is the kind of rough concept here. Plenty more you can do and make it more powerful. But yeah. Okay, so the last part of the diagram, obviously this is mostly about databases, so I won't dwell too much on this, but broadly, your data warehouse is there and doesn't provide value itself. It's only valuable if you actually use the data in there in some way. So it needs to be served out, and you serve it out to these various components here. You know, you've got notebooks for analysis and data visualization. I really love working with Jupyter notebooks. They're super awesome for this type of stuff.
Question, Tom. Sorry, it was something came through earlier, but I think it's the right time to ask it. In terms of visualization, and I don't know the answer to this, can you use SQL to create graphs and charts directly, or do you need a layer over the top?
There are some tools that do play in that space. So you know, Jupyter notebooks, I think you can actually write SQL that and then chart it kind of directly, but it's not kind of the immediate charting like you might think. There's a really great tool out there called Retool, R-E-Tool. That one lets you write SQL and then directly connect it to UI elements. And so you can create your own charts. I actually use that for my regular kind of reporting, and it will run the SQL and update the charts kind of as you load it, which is awesome. You can also use like Power BI if you're in the Microsoft stack. That will, you can configure that to pull from SQL and then chart directly, or Power BI, or Tableau. Yeah, I think Snowflake has some built-in in its like user interface, has some charting as well. I didn't play with that too much. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of solutions out there in the BI space for turning that SQL to charting, making that direct. Definitely important. I've listed another one there called Mode. That's pretty cool for SQL and visualization, although I don't think it's free. So other things I use, you know, various feature engineering steps, anything that's beyond what SQL can do, I push across to my machine learning pipeline. I'm currently using DVC, a program called DVC for orchestration of various Python scripts, which I'm finding really awesome as well. That's pretty much, I split my feature engineering to some stuff in SQL, but then anything that gets a bit too inefficient or can't be done gets pushed across into Python land over on this side. So that all happens inside of model training, that stack there, which is using Docker essentially, so that I run it on a cloud computer. Sometimes I run it on my laptop, so that the great thing about Docker is you can run the same container locally, or I can run it in the cloud if I want to keep my laptop free for other stuff. Yeah, then the other key things, obviously notifications, pushing stuff to Slack, and the actual bot that does the betting itself. It needs to access the data warehouse as well. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I had.
All. Could be like 3 workshops in one, right?
Yeah.
That was really good, and I like that there were some sort of distinct points of difference too from bits of what Paul does, which just sort of showcases that there are multiple ways to skin a cat. Ben, do you want to turn Paul's video back on? I think what I'd like to ask both of you off the cuff, Paul, looking at Tom's prezzo, was there anything particular in there that you had a question or comment on?
No, I think Tom's got a good setup. There's nothing wrong with what he's done. He's done more of the traditional raw cleanse and model layers, which you'll see sometimes if you look online, they'll be called bronze, silver, gold layers in a data warehouse. Mine kind of takes into account the operational, but the analytical one is very similar to what Tom's is. So yeah, no, Tom's done a good job.
And
thanks, Paul.
Seriously, like Paul would be like the perfect university lecturer, right? It really is how it comes across. I love it. And Tom, did you have any questions or thoughts or builds on Paul's?
Lots to learn. I, as you rightly pointed out, Paul, don't use an operational database, so to speak. I tend to fetch my inputs from S3, which isn't like ideal from like an application build point of view, and it's something that I haven't kind of moved, I guess, updated yet. Yeah, so, but I guess questions on yours, I would ask would be around the that feature generation side. Do you actually implement all of your feature engineering into SQL?
Yeah, all of mine's. Oh well, I would say 90% of it is in SQL. There's probably 10% that is a little bit too hard to do in SQL, and it's easy to do with the scripting language. And in that case, it'll be Python or Java. They're the 2 main languages I'd use.
And the other one would be, do you ever write like, I'm not sure if your database kind of support these, but user-defined functions? Do you use UDFs to write custom code to do those more advanced stuff, but keep it running on the SQL engine?
No, I don't use UDFs at all. Generally, because all the feature generation's done once a day for the analytical, moving from history to there. If it's done in the morning to generate everything I need for the day, or it's done not really in the morning, a few times during the day. Racing goes 24/7, but my general times are 7 a.m, midday, and 5 p.m, getting ready for the UK races. And there's probably a midnight one there for the US races as well.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I do a every 2 hours refresh of the markets to see if there's been any movements. That probably should be even more frequent potentially. And then once a day collection, sort of start of day, and then end of day results collection. That's my sort of timing pipeline. Although I have found like when things change, it causes issues. So yeah, there's a lot of race condition and runtime kind of pitfalls to watch out for as well.
So my result collection's 24/7, like it's going non-stop. It's live. I'm looking constantly and gathering that data. It's just generally the features that I can generate ahead of time. So models that I need to run because I run so many models. I will try to run at set points in the day.
I'm aware that we're over intended time, which isn't at all surprising given that this was a really big topic to cover. What I might do is I've asked the guys whether they might be prepared to turn bits of this into something we could stick on the Automation Hub with a bit more meat on a couple of the parts that they covered. If there's anything you'd particularly like to see fleshed out there or extra questions, please shoot them through either on Slack or shoot us an email, and we'll dig into it there. But also, these guys are amazingly active within the Slack community. So if you've got extra follow-up questions, I know you've both been answering ones offline per se. As we go, if there's extras, I know they'll keep answering. So that's probably the play to make sure we don't run super late, especially as I have a couple of last pieces to wrap up with. But thank you both very much for your continued generosity. Without, I mean, obviously everyone, but particularly you guys, this community wouldn't be what it is. So I really appreciate it. Thank you both.
Thanks,
and just to avoid the guys having to sit there awkwardly for the next couple of minutes, Ben, do you just want to turn off cameras? Thank you very much. So before we let you go, we do have a bit of some news, I guess. So after 5 years working at Betfair and absolutely loving it, I have just accepted a head of operations role at a new wagering technology startup. So I'll be leaving Betfair in early June. So that is a little bit heartbreaking for me. People keep asking if I'm excited, and I am, but I'm also grieving because I love the people I work with, I love the exchange, and possibly more than either of those, I love this community. So I'm, excited but sad. It was a very, very hard decision to make, and I will miss everyone a lot. Though I'm leaving Betfair, I'm not leaving the industry, but I'm also not leaving the community. I'm hoping that I can move into the role of customer instead of Betfair team member. I am incredibly confident that the community will be in excellent hands, with Ben, Ivan and Glenn particularly supporting the continued growth of our wonderful community. Like I said, moving across to Discord, we've got all sorts of things planned for the future. And I really hope that you guys can come and meet the team, especially if you haven't already, in Melbourne and Sydney in our upcoming physical meetups. So we haven't had physical meetups since before COVID, going back to early 2020. So it's been a long time now. So really hope you can come and join the guys. So we're starting off with Melbourne and Sydney. So Melbourne in June, so the 23rd of June at our Betfair office. So that's in the CBD, down on Burke Street. I'll get Ivan to drop a link to the Eventbrite page in the chat. And then Sydney in July. So Tuesday 12th. Tuesday? I thought we were going Thursday. Tuesday 12th of July from 6 o'clock. The location will be TBC, but keep an eye out on the Eventbrite page. Will come through soon. Like I said, if you're not on Slack, you should be. You'll get an invite there. I really hope that you guys can come along and connect with each other, but also with Ben, with Ivan, with Glenn, and with the wider Betfair team, because everyone is committed to making sure that this community continues to grow and develop from what we all as a group collectively have achieved over the last few years, and continues to go on to bigger and better things. So I miss you. As always, make sure that wagering plays the right role in your life, that you gamble responsibly and sustainably, and that you enjoy what you do. And so long, and in the words of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Thanks for all the fish. Thanks, guys. Have a good night. Bye.